Welcome back. Welcome back to session number 4. So the marathon goes on, but we are getting close to the end of today's marathon. So this will be the most challenging session after 7 hours, 45 minutes, or almost 8 hours. But I'm sure the topic is interesting enough so that you are alert and keen to hear it. And you're excited about the papers. We will have 4 speakers. The topic of this session is analytical issues in trade and foreign direct investment. And it will be all about microdata, about the use of microdata. Now, I remember 8 years ago we had a conference, statistics conference at the ECB, and we chose the title, Going Beyond the Aggregates towards microdata. Back then that was still a vision, but now you will see it is a reality. It is very concrete reality, and you will see very concrete results, very interesting results. So we will have 4 such papers on very different topics. Now we will move directly into it, as we are a little bit also behind the schedule. So the first paper asks the question, are goods and service trade complementary? Evidence from new micro data sets. And it is will be presented by Stefano Federico. He is director at the Banco d'Italia, where he heads the balance of payments analysis division. Actually, that's where I started 39 years ago, balance of payments analysis. He also master's philosophy from the University of Cambridge and the BA from the University of Pisa and Sant'Anna School of Advanced Studies. And he was also visiting scholar at the Economics Department of Columbia University. So he has, and he has been member of many of these various working groups. You know, the whole alphabet soup of working groups in statistics. He has been in plenty of those. I will not go through all of these for you here. He has the co-authors Flavia, Ciccioli, and Enrico, Tosti. So he will tell us something about statistics on trading goods and trading services, which are usually collected by different institutions. And so he will shed a little bit of light, how much is here so-called bundling, how much is, so to speak, produced directly. Again, sorry, I'm always referring to history. I don't want to bother you with history. Also, those who refuse to learn history are destined to relive it. So it was already, I remember 40 years ago when I started, we had also the problem that there were 2 data sets on trade. One was from the statistics office, which was on trade from customs, etc. And then there was the central bank ITRS collection, and the ITRS numbers were always larger. And then the assumption was, these are the service parts there, because companies are not just selling a steel factory, they are already selling also the services or other things. So the questions come back, or they're the same questions, but maybe now with having microdata, maybe we'll get new answers. And so Stefano, the floor is yours. 15 minutes, like for everybody.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Thanks to the organizers for inviting me to present this paper. This is joint work with the 2 colleagues at Banco d'Italia, Flavia Ciccioli and Enrico Tosti. It's still preliminary work. And the starting motivation of this paper is that trading goods and trading services have been usually considered separately, for instance, in the context of trade agreements, but also from a statistical point of view, where companies typically report data on trading goods and trading services through different surveys or different reporting forms, and even often to different statistical institutions. However, the trading goods and services are likely to be quite interconnected. For instance, there might be complementarities in terms of the output, the so-called bundling. Firms often sell a combined package of physical products together with the provision of services in order to address customers' needs. And there might also be complementarities on the input side. For instance, a lot of services are imported in order to be used for the production for foreign markets. So what we do, first of all, we build a new micro data set combining customs data on trading goods for Italy with the granular survey data on trading services for a representative sample of Italian firms. And we investigate to what extent goods and services trade are interconnected. As noted by a recent OECD paper on bundling, the literature on the interconnection between trading goods and trading services at the firm level is very scant. There is a paper on Belgium by Arju and co-authors that, however, only covers up to 2010. There is some scattered evidence, for instance, a sample of German SMEs focused on bundling, or some evidence for French exporters and service offshoring. But our contribution is that we are the first systematic evidence, where by systematic I mean a data set at a very granular level in terms of firms, products, and destination, covering the last decade, which is quite important given the technological progress that has increased the tradability in services and that has made global value chains even more complex than in the past. There is instead a much larger literature on trading services at the firm level data. However, this literature typically does not look at the interconnection with trading goods, which is the contribution of this paper. And finally, there is a very broad literature on servicification in the manufacturing sector. Here are only some of the key papers, but basically servicification is referred to as the trend, the growing importance of services for manufacturing companies, either as inputs or as functions or as share of revenues of manufacturing companies. And with respect to this literature, we focus on the cross-border component of servicification, which is particularly relevant for the debate on global value chains. We use 4 data sources. Trading goods come from customs data. So they are broken down by firm, partner country, and 8-digit product, and cover almost the universe of exporters and importers in Italy, with the exception of sole proprietorships. Trading services, services excluding travel, transport, and other minor items that are collected through different schemes, comes from a quarterly survey run by the Bank of Italy. And here also the information is quite granular, so it's broken down by firm, partner country, and service category. And importantly, it also includes firms that do not export or import services. And this is the only survey, the only source which is based on a survey. All the other 3 sources are basically census-like sources. Then we use balance sheet data that cover the universe of incorporated firms for Italy, and finally information on the ownership structure for an ultimate owner, affiliates abroad, that is drawn from Bureau van Dijk Orbis. The combination of these data sources yields a sample that covers between roughly 3,000 firms every year between 2013 and 2021. So we cover almost an entire decade with very recent data. Importantly, the sample covers not only services sectors, but also firms in manufacturing sectors, because in Italy, like also in other countries, manufacturing firms provide a substantial contribution to trading services. For instance, in the case of Italy, they account for more than 40% of trade in services of our entire sample. And by construction, the sample is mainly biased toward medium-large firms. And this ensures a very good representativeness with respect to the universe. So if we compare the exports and imports of goods and services of the firms in our sample with the overall aggregates, total exports and total imports of goods and services for the entire Italian economy according to official statistics, our sample accounts for roughly 40% of aggregate exports and imports, 37% for exports, 42% for imports. In terms of empirical analysis, we ask 5 main questions. First of all, which firms are more likely to export goods and services at the same time? That is, which firms are more likely to buy, export, or active in this bundling strategy? For which products this phenomenon occurs more often, and to which destinations? And finally, we're also interested at first, has bundling increased over time? And second, does trading services boost exports of goods, and if yes, through which channels? We define buy exporters as firms that export both goods and services in a given year. And the first column reports the distribution of the number of firms in our sample according to their trade status. And we find that 32% of firms are buy exporters in our sample, while a similar percentage of firms are firms that only export goods. So if we focus only on these first two rows, we see that in our sample, if you consider all firms that export goods, 1 out of 2 also provide services to foreign customers. And not only, buy exporters also are large firms, and indeed they account for a much larger percentage in terms of export value. They indeed account for 67% of total exports of goods and services. Even if overall for manufacturing firm, the provision of services represents only a minor share of total exports of these firms, the share is indeed 13%. We also run a regression-based analysis where we compare firm characteristics between buy exporters and only goods exporters, and basically find that buy exporters tend to be larger, much larger, roughly 60% larger, slightly more productive. They also turn out to have a different production function in the sense they have more skilled labor, less tangible capital per worker, but more intangibles, as would be expected, given that they provide not only manufacturing goods but also services. Finally, they're also significantly more likely to be foreign-owned. Moving at the product level, the key message here is that some products are more bundleable than others, that they're more likely to be sold together with services. Here we followed a paper by Ario and co-authors, and we compute an index of bundleability, and that basically counts for each combination of product group and product and service type, how often a specific product is sold, that is sold in a country by a firm. At the same time, the same firm also sells a specific service type. This is our proxy of bundling. And basically, we find that some products are almost never bundled. For instance, agriculture and food products have very low percentages of bundleability, while instead transport equipment and machinery products are among the products that are more likely to be bundled. The table reports the first 10 combinations of product group and service type in terms of bundleability. And we see that motor vehicles, other transport equipment, machinery and electrical equipment are among the sectors with high bundleability, and they're typically joined with services such as maintenance and repair, other business services, and computer services. In terms of destinations, the question is, do buy exporting firms buy export in all the destinations they serve, or only in some markets? And the answer is that they only sell in a subset of the markets that they sell to. Indeed, we find that buy exporters sell goods and services only to 20% of the countries that they serve, compared to 67% where these buy exporters sell only goods, and the remaining percentage where these firms sell only services. And in which countries by exporting is more likely. We run a linear probability model with by exporting dummy at the firm country year level as a dependent variable, and we basically find that by exporting follows the gravity law, like many things in the world. So by exporting is more likely toward a country that is large, richer, and also closer to Italy. And we also find a significant role of parent and affiliates location. So by exporting is more likely if the firm has its own parent company in the destination, or if it has own affiliates in the same destination. Then we've also looked at trends in by exporting over time. And to do this, we look at a subset of firms to have a balanced panel of firms. And we find that in 2021, roughly 46% of exports of goods were bundled with services, where by bundle here we mean that they were sold by firms that at the same time, in the same year, also sell services in the same country. And this percentage is 7 percentage points larger than it was at the beginning of the time period considered in this work, so with respect to 2013. So there is indeed evidence of a growing trend towards increasing by exporting that might be related to growing tradability in services, higher complexity of global value chains, or increased need for improve the customer's experience through the provision of services bundled with goods. And as the final part of our empirical analysis, we also look at whether trading services helps firms to sell more goods or goods at a larger price. And basically we regress the log of exports of goods. Let's start with the first column, the log of export value of goods for firm I at the product P, country C, and time T. On two dummies, the first indicates whether the firm I exports services to the same destination in the same year, and there is a similar dummy in terms of imports of services, whether the firm imports services from the country the firm is exporting a good. And finally, we control for parent and affiliates location in the country where firms are selling products. And we also control for product country year fixed effects that take into account demand shocks, basically, and firm year fixed effects. And basically what we find is, first of all, that trading services seems to be associated with larger exports of goods, 18% for exports and a similar coefficient for imports. Then we decompose to see whether it's a story of price versus quantity. So we decompose value in unit values versus quantities, physical quantities, and we see that there is no effect on unit values, but it's entirely a story of larger quantities. And finally, for the subset of EU countries, we're able also to explore this new dimension. That is, we look at whether trading services helps firms reach a larger number of customers or helps firms selling a larger average volumes to a single customer. And basically, we find that exports of services seems to be associated with larger quantities per single customer, together with a smaller number of customers, which is consistent with exports of services being customized to address specific needs of customers, while imports of services seems mainly to allow companies to reach a larger number of customers. I conclude very briefly. Basically, in this paper, we build a new macro data set to study the interconnection between trading goods and services at a very granular level. And we find evidence of significant complementarities between goods and services trade, with some evidence also that these complementarities are growing over the last decade. So the bottom line is trading goods and services should not be looked at separately. This applies to statisticians, economists, and trade negotiators. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Stefano, for this interesting presentation. So we have two new questions then for the small talk. Are you a buy exporter? Are you bundleable? It's hard to explain, hard to pronounce. Are you bundleable? So, thank you very much. We move on to the next question. 3 of the 4 papers have questions, so hopefully also answers. The next question is, which countries control your supply chain? Very topical question these days, presented by Oscar Lemmers from Statistics Netherlands. Oscar Lemmers is a senior researcher at Statistics Netherlands. His work there, and also briefly at the OECD, focuses on measuring globalization by developing new methods and data and publishing insights about causes and effects of globalization. So I guess also about deglobalization then maybe these days. So he combines the advantages of national accounts and also with those of business statistics, and gives us then new insights about the role and interplay of small, medium-sized enterprises and multinationals in global value chain. Oscar holds a PhD in mathematics. His co-authors are Khee, Fung, Wong, Tom Notten, Leen, Prenen, and Dennis Dahlmans. Hopefully I pronounced it somewhat correctly. So you can imagine the question of who controls, or the whole question of supply chain is obviously very, very relevant now these days, and the reliance on supply chain, something we thought before, supply is just a question of price. Now we found out it's not just a question of price. There might be other factors, and maybe just one statistic from my side, which I just read yesterday, that last year alone 3,000 new trade restrictions were implemented around the world. So you see, these questions are very relevant, that your supply chain might not just be the question of how much you pay, but there might be other factors here. And if you just mention the questions of weaponizing oil, weaponizing energy supply, or weaponizing foreign direct investment. So a lot of interesting questions, and Oscar has all the answers for us. 15 minutes, please.
Yeah. Yes, well, that's quite some pressure you put on me, but I will try to deliver. I'm happy that I have my co-authors who did quite a lot of work. We all work at Statistics Netherlands. Part of our research was paid by the ministry, but of course, everything I ramble about here is our own. Well, we all know, as you already pointed out, the global value chains, you get a lot of dependencies. We have seen that in the pandemic, we have seen it after the Russian invasion. The European Commission already started earlier this strategic autonomy, and there are all kinds of acts. We have the Critical Raw Materials Act, we have the European Chips Act to mitigate possible problems. Now, my presentation will be about who is producing for us and who is owning that production. Now, if you look standard analysis, GVC dependencies, you would see, for example, that in Chile there is some production that goes to the United Kingdom for steel manufacturing that is used in the Netherlands and then goes continuously on. Now you can imagine that if something would happen in Chile, maybe there would be a natural disaster, or if there would be a strike in the United Kingdom, the Netherlands would be affected. And you would like to know where is location for my critical industries actually taking place, because then I can take measures. The policymakers are asked where are possible bottlenecks. Now, the thing is, it's not only the location of production. If you have ever rented something, you know you might have a wonderful apartment, best location ever, but you have a crazy landlady. And the presentation is about something similar. You might have production for your supply chain, for your critical industries, and the countries where production is taking place are your best friends. Now that sounds really nice, and then you ask around and you hear, oh, it's taking place in my friendly country, but it's being owned by someone similar to the crazy landlady, to a country that we are not really friends with. Meaning that indeed that other country could weaponize its investments. It could use its influence to influence your supply chain. Very basically, that country could hurt you. Now, there is already quite some literature and measurements and to ensure that everything taking place in your own economy that your energy supply, that it's not owned by people you do not like, maybe the food industry, that is relatively safe, but there is not that much, maybe nothing at all, about a little bit further in your supply chain. Again, the plant in your befriended country owned by people that are not really your friends. So that leads to novel analytical challenges, the topic of our conference here. Country of ownership matters, it really matters. So it's necessary to map these dependencies, to map these risks. And yes, I will deliver how can we map something like that? What is the data? What are the methods that we used for that? Now, it's very simple. We simply add the ownership information. For example, in Chile, there would be ownership in France. And if I make very bad jokes about French cheese here, that might reflect on our supply chain. There would be a boycott. The French would try to hurt the Netherlands as much as possible, and it would not end well. Not for the Netherlands, not for me either. So we add this ownership dimension. Now, where do we get the data? Well, first you have to map the global value chain, and that a lot is available. We used Asian Development Bank data because that was the most recent data. Then we looked at the ownership data, and there is a lot. We did not use FDI, but we used about the Fed statistics, who is owning the ultimate owner of production in your country, in other EU countries, what are EU countries owning all over the world, so that we could have some information about that. And we also used data from the OECD, who did wonderful work and even filled out the gaps in the data. Because of confidentiality, there will be gaps. They used modeling to fill those gaps. Well, in a nutshell, we used for the Netherlands microdata, a lot of microdata, because that's the most important part of the value chain. Lots takes place in your own country. Then using standard input-output analysis, how we go back in the supply chain, who is my direct supplier, who is the supplier of my supplier, and so on, which industries, which countries. And then we add the ownership information with a rather crude assumption, but you have to start somewhere. Now, we mapped that for 5 Dutch industries that were considered a bit critical by our National Ministry of Economic Affairs. And we saw that, we could deliver. There were quite some results. We could see ownership for usually about 90% of the supply chain under which ownership it's taken place. There was always a missing part because of confidentiality. There is no complete data. We did quite a lot. We saw it was rather similar, except for energy, but that is because of all that oil that is being produced in Norway, Russia, and Saudi Arabia. Now we switch to another topic. We switch to the EU and we look at China and USA content in production. Now, how do we define that? What is US-related content? That is content that was either produced in the US or that was somewhere in the value chain owned by the US. Basically, how much US stuff is there in our EU production? Now, the questions that arise, of course, is how large is this? Is it big or is it small? How did it change over time? What are the drivers behind that change? And you know what the policymakers want? Can they push some buttons to influence that? And I will deliver, yes. So we look at this Chinese USA related content in EU production. You would see that quite a part is the production part, but there is also a lot of ownership. Especially US has a lot of ownership of production in supply chains, and generally it is growing over time. So more Chinese, more United States influence in European value chains. Now, we would like to decompose the change. What are the drivers behind this? And there are some factors that politicians could influence. If they want to have more American, more Chinese, or less American or less Chinese influence, they can do something with investment restrictions in the EU. If they want to have more or less influence, they can do something with trade of the EU. What they cannot do is trade outside the EU, for example, between the US and Japan. That's really difficult to influence. They cannot do something with investments of China in Chile. That's also difficult. General trade fragmentation, changing technology, difficult for politicians to influence. So can they do something or not? Is it just a natural thing happening over time with no influence at all? Well, we see here in this graph where I decomposed apart how much of the change can be explained by trade of the EU, how much of the change can be explained by investments in the EU, the two factors that can be influenced by policies, and then there is the rest that you cannot influence, so who cares what it is? And then you see that in general, a really large part can be influenced by policies, which is good news for the politicians. If they like China and America or do not like them, they can do something about this. And that is not only here, but the results in general are like this. The room for policies is relatively large. So what is the conclusion? What have we seen today? The takeaway messages for home? Yes, you can map ownership in the supply chain of individual industries. You pick your favorite critical industry for your economy and you can see who's owning everything in it. This ownership can be sizable, really sizable, so there is really room also for other countries to hurt you, to weaponize investments, not only weaponize trade, but also those investments. We have seen that the changes over time are explained by things where policymakers have options, so they like that. Now the thing is, policymakers, but also earlier today, I remember the earlier sessions, there is always the question for more detail. We had something about energy, and then we delivered it to the ministry, and then the people said, yeah, but it is fossil energy. I don't want that. I want these 6 categories of modern energy. And there we could not deliver, as you can imagine. Now, where can you improve the data? Well, there is quite some more Eurostat, ECB data for filling the gaps. You can imagine that you also can use private data to fill out some gaps. There should be more industry detail, more country detail for Africa, for example. But there are good developments in that direction, so that is very positive. And then, of course, we have to do some methodological improvements as well, because we know that affiliates tend to trade more with the trade or with the country of origin. Well, that ends my presentation. Questions later or via email. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Oscar. Thanks for the clear presentation, also for staying well in time. And another question, what is a friend and what's not a friend? That can change over time. I assume you had the US still in the category of friends, but let's see by November whether this is still applying, hopefully. Now that's coming to the third question, and you mentioned already Chile, so let's go to Chile then, since it was in your graph. International sourcing during COVID-19, how did Chilean firms fare? We have Elvira Prades from the Banco de España. Elvira is an economist in the sectoral analysis division of the Banco de España, but she's hardly ever in Spain. She has been visiting at the Central Bank of Chile, and currently she's on secondment to the Banque de France. So I don't know what's wrong about Madrid, but she likes to travel around, ambassador of statistics. No? Her research interests include international trade, inflation dynamics, and price setting using microdata. Her prior professional experience includes the research department of BBVA, so the bank, Banco de Bilbao Vizcaya. So those are very active in big data. You get every day almost an analysis from them using big data. So she received her PhD in economics from the European University Institute in Florence and her master's in economics from the University of Essex. Her co-author is Jennifer Peña from the Banco de Chile. So it's clear that COVID-19 has proven a unique and complex shock to the firms. And in this paper, they now analyze the performance of individual Chilean firms during this episode, drawing on administrative data sets, so on microdata and administrative microdata, something we also try to promote more and more in Europe, but there are always still challenges with the quality of this data. But so we'll hear how is the quality, which we heard during the break is very good, the quality in Chile. They have enormous amounts of microdata, and Elvira will tell us more about that. 15 minutes, please.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for the organizers for accepting the paper. Well, this is a joint work with Jennifer Peña. We are affiliated to different central banks, and the usual disclaimer applies. These are our own views. What is the motivation of this paper? Well, we all know COVID-19 was an unprecedented shock. And one of the big questions was, how are firms adjusting to this big shock? At the Central Bank of Chile, there was a team looking at the domestic margins. And Jennifer and I, we were looking to the international part of the firms. So what we do in this paper is first to characterize how firms adjusted during this crisis. What did they do with their import and export activities? So we check the international links, and then we explore the intensive and the extensive margin. This means that sometimes firms that they just reduce their amount imported, exported, or they just broke the links. And this was also an interesting question to see how are going these links to be recovered in the aftermath. So why do we care? In this paper, we will mainly focus on the import side, because we all know that firms are importing mainly for two reasons. One is they are finding different varieties outside in the international markets, or they find cheaper varieties, and that is also affecting their unit cost, and this makes them more productive, etc. So we will use regression-based approach, and we will let the microdata speak. Sorry. So the Central Bank of Chile has made an incredible effort to build a big data set compiling different micro data sets. So they have this data. We have anonymized, identified, the firms are anonymized, so we cannot identify them, but you can look through different point of views. No? So they have the financial statements of the firm, they have customs data, they have the relations with the banks. It's incredible. So there are a lot of things that they can be done. But in this paper, what we do is just to focus on the tax records, and we merge it with the data on customs. So we have the full universe of firms that they are trading with the rest of the world. And the information that we have from customs is like very detailed. We have HA6 at the 8-digit level, and we have information on all the transactions that the firms are making, and information on the volume and the quantity being transacted. The time span, well, we start in 2017, it's on a monthly basis, the data, and we have information until December last year. So it's very being updated very regularly, and the nice thing is that we can use it for policy, so we are tracking what is going on a monthly basis, and we are also doing like more in-depth research to try to understand questions like not only how the COVID affected, like more recently we are also very interested on how the links with the firms are being changing. We know that after also the COVID and then the Ukrainian war, Russia-Ukrainian war, there's been also a lot of debate as regards like whether firms should be using inputs from closer countries. Also, there is a concern in terms of CO2 emissions. So we wanted to check what our firms are doing in this sense. So this part is like more recent. So I'm not going to get into the details of the data, but we do also the basic cleanings. All this microdata requires like some preparation to be ready to be used. But this microdata on customs data is what the balance of payments in the Central Bank of Chile, they use it to build the national official statistics. For this study, what we do is also to exclude certain sectors that they are very particular. For example, the mining sector is very concentrated. So for we cannot use that information, and then public administration and electricity, gas, and water are also like very particular. So we just take them away from from the study. So here is the aggregate data. We compare year on year, month by month, what has been going on, and what we can see in the red line is the year 2020, where the COVID outbreak started. And what we can see is that exports, they were not very much affected by the COVID. So Chilean firms, they were able to keep on their exporting activity without any major change. But we observed a decline in the imports during April, May, and so on. So it was below the usual import levels. As we have also information, more recent information, here we plot 2021. 2021 was really an amazing year for Chilean imports. Activity recovered quite quickly. They also signed some another trade contracts with other countries, so that explains this high increase. Then, as we have also a lot of details, we can also learn the amount of firms that they are carrying the importing or the exporting activities, or which ones are the firms that they are carrying both activities, that they are both importing and exporting. So, for example, normally it's said that firms that they participate in global value chains are less affected by, they were less affected by this. In the case of Chile, although there are very few firms, but they concentrate a huge amount of the import and export activity, what we saw is that they were like really falling, the number of firms that they were carrying both activities. Another interesting graph that we can obtain by using granular data instead of the aggregate data is that we can see the supply churning. No? So we can see how the aggregate is explained by the changes in the intensity of your imports. So here in the blue line we can see how the intensity of firms, they were just reducing the amount they were importing, but some other firms that what they were doing was just to drop some specific inputs or just stopping their import activity at all. And here, as we also have the information on 2021, we see how it was this big recovery. This data is for the distribution firms that they do wholesale and retail. So they just import and then they can sell either to other firms or to the distributor firms that they just sell the final good to the consumer. We want to make the distinction because we wanted to check on one hand this type of imports. They are made by these big firms that in Chile are very, very important, and they concentrate a big amount of the imports. And on the other side, we wanted to check what are the manufacturing firms that they are importing directly. So because there we can know how it's affecting their production process. So here what we see is that compared to the distribution sector, the manufacturing sectors, they were able to keep their importing activity. So, and then the recovery in 2021, it was slower. So they didn't need to catch up so much as the other firms. Also, with this granular data, we can see that there is a difference between the large firms and the small and medium-sized firms. So when we see that there were like links that they were broken, it's mainly on the small and medium-sized firms, something that is not very surprising. We know that these small firms, they usually export less products and they have more problems to access to the international markets. So here we also show like different characteristics in terms of what is the normal number of suppliers or the average number of suppliers according to the size of the firm. So for example, small firms, they usually have between 1 or 2 suppliers. Well, these numbers are the 1, 2, 3, 4 is different size bins categories. And what you can see, like the bigger firms, there is a lot of heterogeneity. You know, they are like among the large firms, there are firms that they import very little, and others that they can import up to 15 products. And when we check how this has evolved over time, here we plot the distribution of the number of suppliers, and we see that on average it was like has been like stable, but when we look at the different percentage distribution, we can see that the firms that they have a higher number of suppliers, they were the ones that they were reducing more the number of suppliers. So here, one of what we wanted to check is, by using this regression, like to show the time dummies for different variables to see how they have also evolved over time. Because what I showed before was like the mean of the like simple average mean. But we wanted to see is like at the firm level how on average they have changed either the number of suppliers or how it has affected to the unit values. So here we have 3 different plots. One is to see the number of products. So as before, it was like more looking what happens to the aggregate level. Here we see on average, firm by firm, what is happening. And here we see that in 2020, there is a small drop and then a recovery in the number of products. Then we check whether this is more related to the number of countries or if they keep the number of countries that they are from where they are importing. Sorry, this is in terms, we also check for the unit values, as we can compute the unit values that each firm is paying for each product that is importing, whether there are some changes. But no, okay, this is the export dynamics, sorry. This is the export dynamics, and we see that it was that very stable, the same as when we check the aggregates. One of the things that we wanted to check is to see, how the import dynamics can be explained either through the COVID situation in Chile or the COVID situation in the partner countries. Here we have plotted like how was the level of cases. This is on the right-hand side graph. Here is Chile compared with the rest of the economies. In blue is the situation of COVID cases in European countries. In green is other Latin American countries. So we can see that there is a different there is heterogeneity, in this health situation. And we also check for the stringency index, so it's also what were the different governments restricting the economic activity. What we do is to put this in a regression to see whether the annual change in imports or in exports can be explained either by the health situation at the home country or the partner countries. And what we find is that it's more important what is going on in your own country. So the drop in imports was more related or better explained by the situation in Chile, but also the situation in the partner country explains part of the decline in imports. We play with different fixed effects because we want to check whether, well, to control is if I'm importing a same product from different countries, one that is being more stringent or more affected by COVID, whether there is a difference, and also we check for different countries and product fixed effects. And the results are very robust to these. 1 more minute, okay. And then to be very quick, the other question that we work with is on the separation rate. This means like if there are, normally links are being broken and then they restart again. So what we check is the net separation rate. And here what we see that there is a big spike in the net separation rate during the COVID, and then it's stabilized, so there is some entry, but now we see that after the Ukrainian war, this is increased again. So here we do it on a regression analysis. So separation rate has increased by 2 percentage points in 2020 and increased it again in 2022, 2023. Well, we also check other measures, but we wanted to understand is what is behind of this higher separation rate. So we do like a triple difference in difference to check what are the characteristics of the firms that they are registering a higher separation rate or lower separation rate. So first we check for the role of distance to see if you have a higher distant imported country of origin, whether this explains the higher separation rate. What we get is the contrary, that the separation rate is not explained by this distance. In fact, what we observe is that Chilean firms, on average, they are importing more from China or from higher distance. So the drop is taking place around their closer sources. We check also for the concentration at the product level and the concentration of the firm level to check if you have one supplier on one of your inputs or a higher number of suppliers, whether this explains the separation rate. And we don't find that this is an explanatory variable for the increase in the separation rate. We also check for the degree of input specificity to see if you have an input that is very specific and very difficult to change, whether this explains that the separation rate is lower, but there we don't find anything yet. Maybe we have to work more on the specification. The main takeaways of this work is like we offer a detailed account of the international sourcing behavior of the Chilean firms, and we use very disaggregated data. We cover the 19th period and the aftermath, so this is one of the advantages of having this data. Up to now, we have analyzed the direct international links, but we also observe with the data is that a lot of trade is coming through this distributor or wholesalers. And the Central Bank of Chile has also a database where you have the business-to-business trade. So we think we should also explore that part because we are missing part of the story. There's also some diversion to, instead of being a direct importer, that you just, if it's very problematic, you just go through a centralized purchaser. And further work, up to now we have focused a lot on the real side, the quantities and the amount of being imported or imported. And there is a lot of work to do in terms of prices, like to check what the implications for on the unit values. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Elvira. So we move on a few kilometers further east. We move to the Philippines, and we will be exploring the evolving determinants of foreign direct investment and investing country preferences in developing Asian economies using machine learning techniques. And Carmelita, Esclanda-Lo will guide us into random forests and other places in a moment. Carmelita is a bank officer at the Data Management and Analytics Unit of the Department of Economic Statistics at the Central Bank of Philippines. She's leading the big data exploratory studies, primarily using natural language processing and machine learning techniques to develop complementary indices for monitoring and predicting financial market sentiments, prices, and trades, etc. Before joining the central bank, she served at the Ministry of Economics, and she was there spearheading analytics initiatives in analyzing national infrastructure projects, phenomena related to the pandemic, etc., etc. She also teaches data mining and analytics at the University of Asia and the Pacific and the Technological Institute of the Philippines. Her co-authors are Gabriel Masangkay, Chelsea Ann Ong, Rossvern, Reyes, all from the Central Bank of the Philippines, and she will let us know what determines foreign direct investment and what are the most important factors that attract foreign direct investment flows in Asia. Again, as I said, using machine learning, all kinds of machine learning methods, not just the random forests, but also support vector machines, etc., gradient boosting machines, etc. So, Carmelita, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Buenas tardes. Thank you very much for accepting our paper in this conference. So I would like to highlight that the insights in the paper is of the author and not of the Banco Central ng Pilipinas. I know this is the last presentation and it's me between you and then the dinner, so let me do this quickly. So on behalf of the authors, I would like to present to you our paper exploring the evolving determinants of FDI and the investing country preferences in developing Asian economies using machine learning. So we would want to do this study. This is a preliminary study, so this is a series of study, but this is the first because we would want to explore different machine learning methodologies to identify the top predictors of FDI given the recent phenomena that we've encountered, and then also uncover the inherent investment preferences of different investing countries, particularly in developing Asia. So Asia received 51% of global inflows, but remained steady at 662 billion USD, as you can see from 2021 to 2022 per UNCTAD. But on that given period, also we've seen good inflows in some countries like Singapore, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Malaysia. So foreign direct investments play a crucial role, as we know, in the economic development of countries, especially in developing nations in Asia. So number one is capital inflow and economic growth, because the much needed capital of these countries are given by FDI. There's also technology transfer, because some countries investing in our countries and giving us more innovation and managerial expertise, and also access to global markets when domestic companies are being introduced to global value chains, and of course infrastructure development, especially in transport and energy. So FDI inflows into developing Asian economies have increased since 1970s, especially in the 80s, as you can see on the chart, where China also opened its markets and liberalized its economy. So as for the related literature, we have reviewed several studies, but I would want to highlight the Asia studies from Brooks, Sahu, Zaman, and Baban. But upon reviewing these studies, we've seen that the R-squared of these studies are around 0.41 to around 0.61, which is fairly nice result, but then we would want to have a better model and increase this R-squared and accuracy as well. There's also a recent study by Singh in 2023 about deep learning applied also in FDI studies, as well as Miliana in 2017, that focus on different methodologies, and it found that decision trees is the best one, but it got an accuracy of around 31.5%, which is not so good. That's why we did this study. So the objectives of the study, number one, to utilize ML methods to find nonlinear correlations between FDI and its determinants. Use ML methods also to analyze feature importance of the FDI determinants. So we would want to highlight what are the top indicators as of now. We would want to point out that the previous research papers that we've seen actually stop at around 2010. So we would want to actually update that using machine learning. And of course, using unsupervised similarity calculations, which is quite new, as you will see in this study, to uncover similarities of comparable investment destinations and investment patterns of foreign investors. So as for the methodology, as you can see, there are multiple methodologies we've applied from supervised to unsupervised. The difference between the two is that in a supervised technique, there's a target. So it's more like of an econometrics, if you may. But when it comes to unsupervised learning, there's no target. So you just find the trend in the data using all the data that you got. So as for the methodology, let me discuss it briefly. So supervised learning, we have random forest, extra trees, GBM, and cat boost. So these four are actually alterations or iterations of decision trees, if you're familiar with that. So there are decision rules, and you have multiple decision rules. And using those, you would come up with the best predictors of the FDI. So these particular methodologies are focusing on variations of a nonlinear model. So random forest is a multiple combination of decision trees. Extra trees is an extended version of random forest with probabilistic picking. And then GBM uses weak learners also. This is also trees. And then reduce residuals every iteration, while cat boost is a combination of decision tree and GBM. So as you can see, these are just the same model. The basic model is actually decision trees. But we've particularly chosen these four because as I've mentioned earlier, there's a study that actually picked decision tree, but they got unfavorable result. So we also have SVM, support vector machine, to handle nonlinear decision boundaries. SVM is actually using hyperplanes. So instead of the mathematical formula, these hyperplanes actually use calculus to derive different partitions of the data. While unsupervised learning, this is more interesting actually. This is association rule mining. It's a data mining technique used to discover interesting relationships in our data. Probably to put it simply, if you know Netflix, of course, when you go to Netflix, you go there and you watch a movie, and then suddenly Netflix will give you another movie related to that movie. So this is the same methodology. As you can see in the paper, there's also this distance measures and ranking. For example, you'll see support, confidence, and there's also lift. So this is basically used in market basket analysis. So we actually use this is a parallel analysis applied on the CDIS data. And also collaborative filtering, going back to the same example, Netflix. How do Netflix know who are the users that have same preferences? How do they position their movies? This is also the same methodology. So in this particular methodology, we've picked cosine vector similarity to develop the model. So as for the data, we have 20 ASEAN countries based on the IMF Regional Economic Outlook. So there are advanced, emerging, and frontier countries. And the annual observation was from 2008 to 2022. And our data sources include UNCTAD, IMF, World Bank, and the ADB. The first four are the data sets that we've used for the supervised learning, while the last one, the Coordinated Direct Investment Survey, we've used for the unsupervised learning. So this is the bilateral data inflow outflows. So as for the data, here's the clean variables that we've used. So we've used 18 variables. So unlike the previous studies, we've seen that they're more focused on the economic. So as you can see, we've also put environmental variables in here just to see if these variables will actually affect the FDI trend. So as for the result, using the supervised learning techniques, as you can see, we have all samples and then the different groupings of countries. So for all samples, we've seen that extra trees regression has the best R-squared with 80.7%. While for the frontier, you'll see random forests with 72.4%. For emerging, it's support vector regression with 55.3%. And then the cat boost regression with the best R-squared for advanced economies. This basically tells us that the goodness of fit, so the model can actually identify or explain the variance of the dependent variable using more on the cat boost, using the advanced data set. So I think there was a question earlier, does the model vary based on the groupings. And in our findings, yes. So there are different specific models for different country groupings. As we've also seen, this is very much obvious. So trade openness is highly correlated with FDI net inflows. So as you can see, R squared, when we tried a simple correlation, it's around 92% for all samples. So the study aligns with prior research and establishes carbon intensity as a significant predictor of FDI. So what's nice with this study is that we got a good feature importance score for carbon intensity. In the previous literature we reviewed, they were noting that we should also explore climate indicators. I think this study also echoes that we also need to now study and collect data points that are climate related given this result. As you can see, all of the variables are positively contributing to FDI except for carbon intensity, which is the carbon dioxide per GDP. The ultimate investors in developing Asia are Hong Kong and the United States, along with Japan and the Netherlands. So upon studying the CDIS dataset, we've found that for the developing Asia, it's Hong Kong, United States, and Japan. But what's interesting is we can observe a different trend, looking into the different country groups in developing Asia. As you can see on the upper right, you'd see the outward positions of investing countries in frontier countries. So it's mostly Thailand and Republic of Korea. But when it comes to emerging countries, we'll see Hong Kong, Japan, and the United States. And then for advanced countries, you see now the United States being the top one, along with Japan and the Netherlands. So there are different groupings also that you can see using unsupervised learning. This is what I would want to highlight also when it comes to using unsupervised learning. So we've used association rule mining, so you're seeing support, confidence, and lift. So support basically tells you that 46% of the time, Hong Kong and Singapore is on the same transaction, like on the same year, from a certain investing countries. So they're both occurring in the data set for that specific country. So as you can see, these are the top countries, and it's prominent that it's Hong Kong, Singapore, India, and China. We all know that China is now a rising power, and undeniably investors are actually attracted in China. We also have India, which is also a rising star in terms of IT, pharmaceuticals, and even the service sector. And you'll also see here Hong Kong and Singapore, which is the financial hub in Asia, and also the entry point for Southeast Asia and China. And if we lifted, so the collaborative filtering that we've used, so in the first one, we're trying to identify which is the ultimate host, which is the favorite country. In the next slide, you'll see which countries have the same investment patterns or the same choices when it comes to countries in developing Asia. So what we found is Switzerland, France, Canada, Japan, Denmark, Australia, and the Netherlands exhibit the same investment behavior towards Asian economies. But what we've highlighted there, as you can see, there's a simple network graph there that the edges or links are based on the similarity score, and then the size of the circle are the degree or the more nodes connected to it. So these countries, specifically Denmark, Netherlands, and Switzerland and France, are actually having the same investment patterns when it comes to, so using the CDIS data, here's what we found. And these countries in the network are actually investing in the top 5 Asian investment destination, on which 4 we have already identified in the previous slide. So this actually coincides with the previous findings. So for our key takeaways, we found that supervised nonlinear ML or machine learning methodologies are effective in identifying the primary features contributing to FDI with better results. Extra trees regression yielded better R-square of 81% compared to conventional econometric models employed in prior research, which is around less than 70%. So the performance of ML algorithms varies across different subsets of the developing Asian nations. So there's a specific model for a specific group of countries. And we've also found that the preferred countries or investees are Hong Kong, Singapore, India, and China. And the potential reasons we've found from literatures is number one, the trade openness of these countries, favorable tax regimes, robust infrastructure development, and multilateral trade agreements. While on the other side, the investors or the countries with similar investment behavior when it comes to developing Asia, these are Switzerland, France, Canada, Japan, Denmark, Australia, and the Netherlands. And we see that these countries, these are developed countries, and their interests actually are developed more like of the advanced countries in Asia, and more primarily because of technology innovation, research and development, of course, infrastructure, manufacturing capabilities, and renewable energy investment in these countries. As for our recommendations, ML should be further explored to generate new insights. So we have this new knowledge now, and we hope we can maximize it, especially in the FDI literature. And clustering algorithms can be explored to group countries or sectors with similar FDI behavior if you would want to delve more or you would want to check the previous assumptions that we have. And then association rule mining can be utilized to identify co-investment or sequential investment patterns in different sectors. Gracias.
Thank you very much for the interesting presentation and for using 14 minutes and 56 seconds. So really right on the spot. So we have 10 minutes left for potential questions and answers. So I invite the audience here, please. The first, here, the gentleman. Just introduce yourself and your question, please.
I'm Peter Bagyi from the National Bank of Hungary, and thank you for all of you, your presentations. Because of the time pressure, I would have only one note linking to Oscar's presentation. The title of the presentation was "Who owns, control your supply chain?" But the presentation, as I feel, was mainly about who owns supply chain. It is very important, but I think that it would be also important to take into account the dependence of industries on each other. I mean that, for example, if there is a problem at the start of the supply chain, all of the next steps would be in a hard situation. So I think that who owns the first steps of the supply chain may more control this supply chain than players at the end of this chain. So I think that it would be worth analyzing also the dependencies of these industries, of these activities on each other. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. So, who else here, please? You get it from the other side.
Thank you so much. I have maybe a follow-up question for Oscar and also a question for Elvira. So for Oscar, I think the question was super interesting, which portion of supply chain has more control? And I think in some of the business literature, in fact, there is a relationship between market power and how much the control in the supply chain is. So you can imagine, you know, like in the food industry, right, the farmers have no market power. The retailers don't really have much market power, but it's in between the wholesalers, and there are a few companies that trade that have a lot of market power. So I think it could be an interesting thing to explore, in fact. For Elvira, I don't know if it's true for the case of Chile, but the way I think of the COVID shock is that there were really two stages. So 2020 was mostly lockdown. So from the firm point of view, it's really for trade is a demand shock, right? Either consumer demand or demand for important intermediates. Whereas 2021 was dominated by supply chain disruptions, which could be thought of as either supply or both demand and supply. So I was wondering if you're able to explore this over time heterogeneity, because different firms may have been differently affected by the demand shock versus supply shock, also depending on their size.
Okay, thank you very much. One more. The final question for today. Yes, please.
Bundesbank for Carmelita. You noted in the end of your presentation that for different country groups, different models perform best. Would you extend that to other problems as well, so that you would say for any problem that you would try to tackle with machine learning, you would always try to apply some ensemble method?
Okay, thank you very much. I don't see any more. So, Oscar, Elvira. Yes, Oscar, you got 2 questions, please.
Yes, these are indeed very relevant questions and suggestions. I think when we are considering the whole supply chain, would you want to put some extra weight on the beginning of the supply chain? I think it all depends. If you are looking at the whole supply chain and you would like to know how is the whole supply chain affected, then yes, I fully agree. The first one decides everything. But if I'm somewhere in my supply chain and I'm a local policymaker, I'm only interested what is going to happen to that particular industry in my country, I think everyone in the supply chain, the first supplier, the second supplier, and so on, has the same power. So depending on the question, I think yes, have an extra look at the first supplier or not. But on the other hand, that also relates to your remark that in the business literature, I'm not that familiar with that, so I should definitely talk with you later. I can imagine indeed that there will be different market powers, and then I can imagine that indeed countries will have different power as well. In general, it's often said, well, these statisticians and economics, they can make really nice models and thoughts, but speak to the companies. How is it in real life? And I think that is something we have not done yet, but I hope to have that opportunity to say if we have meaningful things or that we will simply be laughed at.
Thank you very much, Elvira. The 2 phases of COVID.
I'm thinking that maybe we should include in the regression analysis the supply bottlenecks indicators that, in fact, in Bank of Spain we have constructed for Latin American economies, and I think that could help to disentangle like the 2 phases of the COVID crisis. Like the first part, like everybody stays at home, and then the second part, like okay, getting back to normal is not being that easy. So thank you. I think can be a good point.
Thank you, Carmelita. Different models for different questions.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Of course, in our study, we found different models for different groups of countries. And your question is, how about ensemble models? So an ensemble model, an example would be the cat boost regression, which is a combination of decision trees and gradient boosting method. But then as you can see, it didn't perform very well. So it's still best to compare different models, especially now that we're using different coding techniques. So it's easy to apply most of these models and find the best one so that we can get the best fit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Stefano, you answered everything before, so no questions. So with that, 18:12, so we are even 3 minutes before. I guess you all deserve a break and dinner, but we hear in a second, Maria, where to go, when and where. So please. Thank you very much, first of all, to the speakers. Thanks for the questions. So a round of applause.